Happy 2016, everyone! I'm getting a little bit of a late start this year on recipes. I'm Italian, so you could call it fashionably late, but it's already off to a great start. We hit 3,000 subscribers, and I can't thank you guys enough for sticking with me on this fun little journey and trying my food. Winter started out a little late as well in Chicago, but we are finally in the full swing of things. So to start out this new year, I've got a great wintry recipe for you by request. It's a vegan or vegetarian pot pie. It's actually not hard to do. If you were to look at any traditional recipe, if you subbed out chicken for something like tofu and chicken broth or stock for, say, vegetable broth or stock, you'd be good to go. But this is how I do it. I like to put pot pies in these individual ramekins so that everybody can have their own with the lovely crust all over the top. So this recipe will make 6 of them. For the pastry crust, I'm starting with a very basic recipe, but there's a little technique that I like to use to help it come together really quickly. So I'm starting with 1.5 cups flour, whole wheat pastry flour, and I'm adding 6 tablespoons of coconut oil. In this entire recipe, you can sub out coconut oil for butter or vegan butter, whichever you prefer. They're all interchangeable. I like coconut flour in the pastry crust itself because once it bakes, I don't taste it too much, but you will see me using butter in the rest of the recipe just because that's my personal preference. The little trick for my pastry crust is to keep a cup of ice water nearby with the ice cube in it so you know it's ice cold. Because we all bake at different altitudes, there's different things about the weather that day that might affect the dough. You don't know how much water you'll need, so you want to use just enough. This is how I do it. With the flour and the coconut oil, I'm adding a generous pinch of salt, and then we'll just pulse this together to make little crumbs. It's going to be loud. Then I take the top off of the food processor and I add the water 1 tablespoon at a time just until I start to see that dough come together. It's usually about 5 or 6 tablespoons. So I'm guessing I'll need at least 3 to start. And then we start it again. So I can see it's starting to come together, but not quite. That's why I'm going to add 1 or 2 more. So there it is. As soon as you start to see this little dough ball come together, then you know it's ready. And then you can just wrap this in plastic and keep it in the fridge while you make the rest of your pot pie. Over a low to medium-low flame, you want to start to melt some vegan butter, or coconut oil, whichever you're choosing. We're using 3 tablespoons, and that might seem like a lot, but remember, we're making 6 of these. And then you start to add your vegetables. I'm going to do these all together just to keep things moving along. I'm doing 1 small onion, 3 carrots, and a small red skin potato. For flecks of green, you could use celery or even some zucchini. I'm going to be using peas, so I'm going to add those in at the end. And something to remember is with something that gets a little mushy or falls apart easily, like the tofu or the peas, you want to add those in at the end and not cook them all the way. We'll add some salt to draw out the moisture. And then I'm just going to cook these down for about 5 minutes or so. You'll be able to feel when they get much softer and easier to work with. Before we add the broth, we're going to thicken this with a bit of a roux. So equal parts butter and flour is a roux. We use 3 tablespoons, so we'll do 3 tablespoons of flour. You just want to coat it evenly. Push it around a bit. You don't want any clumps. Just a couple of minutes so that everything gets coated until you can't see any bits of flour, and you certainly can't smell them either. I've turned the heat down to low now as well. And then I'm going to add 2 cups of vegetable broth. I'm just going to leave a lid ajar here so that it can bubble up and thicken. Once it comes to a very low boil, I'm just going to let it sit here for a bit longer to really let it thicken up. And then just before I put them in the ramekins, I'll gently fold in about a cup of peas and a half a package of cubed firm tofu. And then we'll just gently push that around a bit so it gets nice and thick. And it starts to look like vegetable soup. And then one last thing before they all go in the oven is to season it. A little extra salt, some pepper. And then I love to get really generous with the garlic powder and the oregano. You can do this all to taste. Then we just take a little bit of the filling and fill up each ramekin to the top. To cover these pot pies, I had a little change of lighting here. I actually had to go to work partway through. So I refrigerated the vegetables, which you definitely could do and come back to later like I had to. I'm just taking a little bit of the dough at a time, rolling it out. You could flour the cutting board if you need to, but I don't feel like my dough needs it. It's rolling just nicely without it, so I don't want it too floury. And then because I don't have a circular cookie cutter, I'm just gonna use a bowl that's slightly larger than the ramekins themselves and cut around it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I really like the rustic look of pot pies. Just remove the excess dough. And then take one of the pot pies, stretch the dough over the top. You could do fancy things like pinch the edges with a fork, make it perfect and circular if you wanted, but since I do like that rustic look, I don't mind if it's a bit uneven, so long as it covers the whole thing and it's sealed around the top. And then I will just finish the rest. And then one last thing to top them all off. In place of an egg wash, you can use butter or vegan butter or coconut oil. As I mentioned, I don't really like the coconut oil on top. It's just a little too coconutty, but your choice. You just want to coat it with something, with a little brush here, to keep the tops from burning. This will just give them that nice golden brown color. And then of course, because these are sealed at the top, we have to give a little room for air to escape. So you just cut across with a paring knife in the top, and that will help them puff up and look like those quintessential pot pies that we all love. When I was little, my mom used to carve my initial into mine and a T into my sister Teresa's. So I'm going to put a little M on top for one of mine. And then one last little bit that I just like is a little extra pinch of salt on top. It just makes that buttery crust taste even better. And then we just pop this in a 425-degree oven for about 20 to 25 minutes until they are perfectly golden brown on top. And then when they're golden brown, oh, and they smell delicious, they are ready to come out. Ah, a couple of mine deflated. I didn't wrap them tightly enough, but they look amazing otherwise. I'm going to take a little bite out of one of my little deflated guys here in the middle. The key is you really have to make sure that the pastry wraps around the outside. Oh, but when you dig into it, all that steam comes out. That is the perfect winter flavor. Stay warm, everyone.